When determining the effective date for a new standard, the board thinks about a number of different factors. One is the urgency of the financial reporting issue. Second, other standards that are coming down the pike in terms of their effective dates. The third is the amount of resources that a company has to implement the new standard. And then fourth, the feedback that was shared by our stakeholders in terms of what they believe is an appropriate implementation period.
Just like all the other decisions the board makes in its projects, the decision about the effective date of a new standard requires the use of judgment. That judgment is informed by input we receive from stakeholders. For example, a number of years ago, the board found itself working on several significant projects that were going to finish around the same time. That included revenue recognition, leases, and accounting for financial instruments. The board issued a discussion paper back in 2010 that was trying to elicit whether stakeholders thought it would be best to apply all those new standards at the same time or whether they should be applied sequentially.
The 2010 discussion paper elicited mixed input. Generally, large or publicly traded companies preferred the Big Bang all-at-once approach because they could revamp all of their internal systems at the same time. And generally, private companies and not-for-profit organizations, especially smaller ones with smaller staffs and more limited resources, prefer the staggered approach, implementing standards one at a time. This feedback is also consistent with what we've been hearing from the Private Company Council and our Not-for-Profit Advisory Committee.
The leasing standard was issued earlier this year in February of 2016. But in addition to the leasing standard, the C&M standard and the credit losses standard was also issued, all within a 6-month time period. When the board was thinking about effective dates and the appropriate implementation periods for each, it decided as a best practice to bring all of the project teams together to share the feedback that they had received for each project at the time. Through that process, the board determined the best approach for staggering the effective dates in order to not tax companies too much in terms of the time and the resources they have to implement each standard. Another interesting aspect of the effective date process is determining how to carve up the effective date for different stakeholder groups. Typically, we carve up the effective date between public business entities and all other entities. But for example, in the credit losses project, we had to go one step further. We wanted to make sure smaller financial institutions had more time, so we carved up the public business entity definition even further and had those who file with the SEC go first, and then all other companies that still meet the public business entity definition wait a little longer and then apply the new standard.
When setting effective dates for private companies, the board generally provides an incremental 1-year deferral beyond the date required for public business entities, and typically makes standards effective initially for an annual period rather than an interim period. This factors in the longer learning cycle, more limited resources, and greater reliance on their outside CPA firms by many private companies. So when setting effective dates for not-for-profit organizations, the board considers, on a standard-by-standard basis, whether all not-for-profits should have an incremental deferral similar to that for private companies, or whether not-for-profits with public debt, generally issued on their behalf by state and local governments, should implement at the same time as public business entities. Many not-for-profits in capital-intensive industries, such as healthcare and higher education especially, have such public debt.
In order for us to make good decisions about effective dates, we need to continue receiving your feedback on our projects. As always, we encourage stakeholders to follow our activities and provide comments on our proposals. For more information on upcoming effective dates, visit the FASB website. Hover your mouse over the Standards menu, then click on Accounting Standards Updates Effective Dates.